Wait, here's 1.8. A little different on this one. There's a little picture of me, a little video of me up in the corner. So there's that. Same as before. It's a video, it's a recording, 1.8. Pause, do the bell ringer. Today's bell ringer is explain the quote in your own words. In your opinion, what does the quote mean? And the quote is, "It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong." So what do you think that means? In your own words. Me. There it goes. Okay, so we're doing 1.8 Reconstruction. The era immediately following the Civil War is known as Reconstruction because they are reconstructing the country, particularly reconstructing the South. So problems with peace. We're going to see a lot of problems with it, particularly in the South. So like I said, Reconstruction is rebuilding the South and trying to reunify the Union as in North and South together. So there are a couple of different Reconstruction plans. Lincoln has a Reconstruction plan. He says 10%. So what that means is 10% of a state. So Missouri, Florida, whatever happens to be, 10% of a state has to take an oath before the state can become part of the Union again, saying that they don't want slavery anymore and they want to be part of the Union again. Until they get that 10%, not going to happen. But he sets it low so that it can happen quickly because he wants to reunify the country as quickly as possible. Congress, on the other hand, they want 50% of a state to take that oath and 100% abolish slavery. They want no shenanigans when it comes to this. They're not worried about it happening quickly. They just want it to happen correctly. So the problem is a lot of people are still really upset, particularly people from the South are upset with Lincoln. And so April 14th, 1865, he is going to be shot and killed in the back of the head, or shot in the back of the head and killed while watching a play. Remember that, because that is going to be a test question, that he was killed while watching a play. John Wilkes Booth got into his booth, like got into the little, I don't know what it's called, like his balcony, came up behind him, shot him in the back of the head. There are some people, if you look at this image down here, this mask, this is a death mask, that they sometimes take impressions of your face after you've died. And if you look at it, things are a little bit off. His face is not quite symmetrical. And some people speculate that perhaps John Wilkes Booth did him a service by shooting him and killing him because he was going to suffer a very painful death, because they think that he may have been sick. So there's nothing to write on this one. This is the processional of the funeral for President Lincoln. And if you look up here in this window, there's a small child. That child happens to be future President Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, you'll see. I love Teddy Roosevelt. You guys will see that in a little bit when we get to, I think, 2 units from now. But I love Teddy. So Johnson has his Reconstruction plan. He is basically going to follow what Lincoln did. He said that 10%, but he is going to add a couple of things. So he says Confederates, like people in the Confederate Army, and people that are unwilling to denounce the Confederacy, they're disenfranchised. What that means is they lose their ability to vote. He also says that every state must protect the rights of freedmen as in slaves that have been freed, and that is the state's responsibility to make sure that they are protected. So there are 2 different types of people that are kind of going to take advantage of the situation, one more so than the other. You have carpetbaggers and scalawags. A scalawag is a Southerner who's going to join the Republican Party, which is the party of the South, because our political parties will switch. So the Democrats in the South are actually more like our Republicans today, and our Republicans in the North are more like our Democrats today, just because they do a shift and they go back and forth. But a scalawag is a Southerner. He's going to join the Republican Party and he's going to support Reconstruction. They're seen as traitors because you were going against everything that the Confederacy wanted you to. And people are upset about that. A carpetbagger is going to be a Northerner. He's coming down to the South with a carpet bag, like the one that's pictured here, with a carpet bag with his goods, trying to help the South and make sure to fuel Reconstruction. And he's going to help you get back on your feet. And he's really just exploiting the South for all of the damage that they've gone through. So military Reconstruction. The Reconstruction Act is going to divide the South, so our southern states, into 5 military zones. And each of those zones will have its own military presence that are going to maintain the rights of the freedmen. You're also going to get a series of Reconstruction amendments. These 3 amendments are known as Reconstruction, 13, 14, and 15. So 13th Amendment officially ends slavery in the United States. Gone, you cannot own a slave anymore. 14th Amendment gives them citizenship, something they were not privy to before this. And 15th Amendment gives them suffrage, which gives them the right to vote. All freed men, all freed male slaves are given the right to vote. You also have the Compromise of 1877, which is eventually going to pull out those soldiers out of those 5 military zones. And once those soldiers are gone, things go back to exactly the way that they were before. And you have a lot of the whites that were still unhappy about Reconstruction being very cruel and in some cases murdering former slaves. So even after the Civil War is over, Reconstruction has begun, and the Reconstruction Amendments are in place, freeing slaves, giving them the right to vote, giving them citizenship. Things are still not equal. I mean, we'll be fighting the civil rights movement even into the 60s and 70s, and clearly we have an issue today. But freedmen define freedom. The problem is, once these slaves are freed, they're not sure what to do. It's kind of like when some people come out of prison. They're not sure what to do. They're out, and they don't have a very regimented and particular type of schedule. They don't have a purpose in a lot of their eyes, so they're not sure what to do. Some people are going to stay in the plantation. Some of them will stay because that's what they've known all their life, and they have nowhere else to go. Some of them are going to go to the north in search of something new, and some of them are going to stay and kill the white man. They create the Freedmen's Bureau. A lot of the freed slaves, they are unskilled in anything that is not agriculture, that is not farming. And so it's really hard for them to get jobs. They're unskilled, they're uneducated, and they're untrained in any other job other than agriculture. So they create the Freedmen's Bureau that's going to help them get on their feet and experience a new life. They get food, they get shelter, they get education. It's not going to be very successful, but that's because the South didn't support it. And if you have a lot of people fighting against it, it's really hard for it to be successful. So because so many white Southerners were unable to vote because they refused to take that ironclad oath of allegiance to the United States in order to be reincorporated and be given the right to vote back, there's actually a lot of black men that get elected into Congress because people that are voting based on merit, when you have a large number of male slaves that have now been given the right to vote because they're no longer slaves and they're citizens now, you have a large number of black people becoming congressmen. And that's the very beginning of the semblance of diversity that's going to find its way into Congress. So sharecropping, it's a problem in the South because we've talked about this before, that slavery was needed because of the agriculture, because of the plantations. And they didn't want to pay people for it. Well, now that labor force is gone. So they start to engage in something called sharecropping, which is basically the same thing. A plantation owner is going to rent out their land, and freed slaves are going to grow on that land. And they just have to pay the rent and part of the profit back to the plantation owner or the landlord to use it. So introduction of Jim Crow. You guys have probably heard this term before, especially in 8th grade, but even more generally than that. So Jim Crow is a series of laws that is going to segregate most public places. Public restrooms, schools, restaurants, libraries, etc. All those places separated. You have ones for whites, you have ones for blacks, and you can't cross over. You also have black codes. You have no black juries. They wouldn't put them on a jury. A lot of them don't hold public office except for Congress. And if a black man was just seen standing there, that's considered being idle, and you're probably doing something wrong, and you were arrested for it. You also have Plessy v. Ferguson. So Plessy v. Ferguson is going to be a very big case in American history, and it being overturned later by Brown v. Board of Education is going to be a very big case. But Plessy v. Ferguson said that as long as they were equal, you could have separate. So let's say in schools, as long as you had teachers, desks, and books, you were equal, and you can have a black school and you can have a white school. The problem is in that black school, those books might not have covers. Those desks might not have chairs, and those teachers might not be qualified for their job, but you can still say you have teachers, books, and chairs and desks. Boom, you're equal, and that's okay. So it establishes the doctrine of separate but equal, and that separate was legal as long as they were equal, even though they weren't really equal. So the KKK, the Invisible Empire of the South, these are the group of men that want to bring back that the South will rise again, and they're not big fans of African Americans. So they're going to use intimidation and threats and cruelty in order to get their way. They're going to burn crosses. They're going to lynch and hang blacks because they want to. Whether or not they didn't know their place, just in general, they're going to do it. The very first Grand Wizard of the KKK is Nathan Bedford Forrest. If you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, this is actually the name that, or the man that his character is named after, and he says it in the film. He's like, oh yeah, I was named after a gentleman named Nathan Bedford Forrest, and it shows him it's actually Grand Wizard. So a little bit we might watch, depending on how the universe goes. We might watch Forrest Gump. We usually watch Forrest Gump in like May. We'll see. So where they get some of their influence from, where they get the costumes from, it's actually from an actual church. And this is what it looks like. And then they decided to do this with it instead. So saving the dumb white folks. So we're talking about the right to vote. They're trying to disenfranchise blacks. Even though they've been given the right to vote, they want to try to take it away by putting other things in place that make it hard for them. So they put a poll tax in, which is a tax that you have to pay in order to vote, which a lot of blacks don't have money. These freed slaves, they don't have a lot of money, so they can't pay that poll tax, meaning they can't vote. The other thing they put in is a literacy test. Can you read? Then you can vote. But they made the reading test, the literacy test, much, much harder for blacks. And it was a problem. For whites, however, they had the grandfather clause. If your grandpa could vote, then you could vote without having to pass a test. That didn't apply to, technically applied to blacks, but the problem is that grandpa was a slave. They didn't have the right to vote. And you don't have to be able to read. As long as grandpa could vote, no matter how dumb you might be, you might not be able to spell your name, but you're allowed to vote. So don't write this. This is just a little fun. Normally I would sit here and ask you, what do you think that says? You take a second, you'd be really confusing. It looks like, oh, snacks? What about snacks? Okay, so what it says is, this would be like the equivalent of a white man's literacy test. Something that they could understand. And mind you, we're talking about redneck folk in the South. But that says, see them snakes? They are snakes? Yes, they are snakes. No, they're not. Yes, they are. See them beady eyes? They are snakes. Well, I'll be. Does it look like it says any of that? No, but that's what it says. So, kind of the conclusion here for Reconstruction, it doesn't really make things better for a very long time. So it kind of does, and it technically, on paper it does, but in practice and reality it doesn't. So the South saw Reconstruction as shaming, and they were very upset about it. Creates a lot of animosity between Southerners and the freed black men, and it's really just going to make things worse. It's not as systemic anymore, but it is. And it's not as publicly racist or as publicly cruel, but it's still really going to be. So same as always, take your notes, take your pictures. If you have questions, write them down so you can ask me tomorrow. Make sure to put those pictures on your Google Slides or Google Docs. This is the last lecture for this unit. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.